I am talking to the co-writer and star of the upcoming show, The Shepherds, Erica Bardin. How are you today?
I am great. It's actually, it's funny. The show is called Shepherds, but someone else we spoke to called it The Shepherds, and it's making me wonder if we should change the name.
It's like I know it was hard because it's like upcoming show Shepherds, and it's like I always want to put the in front of everything. So
Well, it's funny. A lot of people also wanted to spell it differently, like even people in our cast.
is there a different? Okay, now I'm going to sound. Is there a different way to spell Shepherds?
No,
Okay.
but people wanted to.
Okay.
So I found that very amusing.
Before we talk about the show, I like to ask the first question here. What was your first job in Hollywood?
What was my first job in Hollywood? Oh my gosh. Well, I started in journalism, so I don't know if that constitutes Hollywood. Um, in that I was a researcher, so not as I will give sort of my first Hollywood job, which was working for a pop band, a big pop band
That is
that
fantastic.
yes, that sold a lot of neon colored clothes. Because we all know, right? Like you can't just be a musician anymore. You have to have tons of product lines, tons of merch. So yeah, that's definitely a job that like people want to ask about. So that might be my first Hollywood job.
When dedicated pharmaceutical researcher Madison Shepherds gets fired, she opens up an underground psychedelic therapy clinic with her terminal ill father and hippie best friend. What inspired you to write this project?
A few things. My writing partner and I, Susan Graham, we have always written, sort of female-centric characters, and so we knew we were going to write a story, again on a complicated, flawed female. At the same time, I had been doing a lot of research into psychedelic therapy, and what inspired me to do that was my partner's brother has suffered from an opioid addiction and the challenges that come with that for quite some time. And he has other members in his family that were suffering from addiction. And so to me, looking at that even on a bigger picture of that being such an epidemic and having such a hold on so many people, I thought, oh, I wonder like what other kind of alternative, medicine and therapy is out there. So I just started looking into it. And I remember I did read this incredible book, and that was my gateway drug into this journey of researching psychedelic therapy. And I really became sort of impassioned by the absolute stop of scientific research that happened from, a governmental level. Nixon shut down research that was happening in Menlo Park. Like those, I call them like the OGs of psychedelic research. And one of the men that was in that group actually wrote that book that I read, and I've been in touch with him. He's one of the most incredibly thoughtful and considerate people I've ever talked to. But yeah, I thought that this was so sad that we just all of these scientific breakthroughs were happening, and then there was just this complete blockade when Nixon came in and shut it all down. And so I thought, wow, like the juxtaposition of the proliferation of the opioid crisis up against like this complete obstacle to scientific discovery was really, really interesting to me from a story perspective. And when Susan and I talked about it, we said if we could put, a female character that was, dealing with an identity crisis, her world starts to come crumbling down. We felt like that was the right vehicle to then shine a light on where we are at with pharmacology and where we are at with healthcare and medicine. So that's kind of how we initially arrived at that narrative.
I guess I might follow-up question to that, with all the research that you have done regarding this, what is the biggest misconception about psychedelic drugs?
I mean, I think the biggest misconceptions is that, that psychedelics will drive people to, I don't know, murder their family members, or, jump out of an airplane without a parachute. Like, I think like these crazy machinations of what psychedelics might drive you to do. And sure, like people that do psychedelic, and depending on how they do them and who they do them with, you can go on a crazy journey. You can act, it's in the name, right? Hallucinogenics, like you can hallucinate, but actually physically to what's happening to you, the toxicity of that is on the other side of the spectrum, as to say to something like alcohol or cocaine or heroin. And so I think that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions, is because the way that those drugs have, or those substances have been classified, and they're still a Schedule 1 drug. So mushrooms, psilocybin, which is the main ingredient in mushrooms, acid, all of these drugs, the natural form, or the synthesized form of ecstasy, those are all in the same class as heroin, cocaine, PCP, drugs that really can kill people. So that to me is what is quite misunderstood in mainstream culture.
When writing this, when I watched the pilot, what I really liked was there's a healthy balance of comedy, there's a healthy balance of heart, and there's a healthy balance, I think, of inspiration within that first pilot. What was it like writing that healthy balance to make sure that you captured all of those things in just this short amount of time?
It was a lot. And there was times where we wondered if we were putting too much in, but we've always wanted to live in that place. We've always wanted to live in the place of gray area, as our director talks a lot about, of that juxtaposition of you can be really sad and be really happy in one greater scene. I think that's true to life. I often say, people laugh at funerals. People cry when something good happens. Both things can happen like almost simultaneously. So that's always, that sort of very human existence has always been a driving force in Susan's and my writing. But we also wanted to, because there's a lot of sort of symbolism going on, and we wanted to pack that in, and we wanted to keep the audience engaged, we tried to do a lot of sort of representational moments, subtextual moments, visual moments, right? Like, oh, that's to tip you off to something that means something. So that's kind of how we approached it.
With the story kind of being somewhat personal to both of you, what made you choose Lauren to direct it?
It wasn't just because Lauren's married to Susan. No, Lauren has an incredible eye. She has an incredible visual sense. She loves to write complicated female. I mean, she loves to direct and create complicated female characters as well. And I know she was drawn to the story because of that, and also drawn to this idea of breaking down this concept of right and wrong. That it makes it easier for us to believe that there is this clear right and wrong. But when you actually look at most things in life, that's not true. Especially when you're looking at sort of institutionalized ideas of right and wrong. So she just got the story. She understands our writing. She understands what we're trying to convey. And one thing that was really, really cool, she and our DP, Julia Swain, when we always say like, oh God, when those two got together, they pitched this idea of shooting on 16 millimeter, which is, it's a whole different type of set when you shoot on film. It's a completely different type of set. And as much as, you know, Susan and I producing it from a producerial perspective, as much as like we all want to shoot on film because that's the cool thing to do, right? And it looks incredible when you shoot on film if you get your takes, right? Like if that gate doesn't, you know, have a hair in it every single time, which could happen, or, you know, microscopic amoeba, I don't know. But so she presented it to us as like, listen, this is about the story. And we'll shoot it not only on film, but we'll also shoot it in digital. And the reason why is because this character that's going through this transformative journey, in the world that she starts in, it's very sterile, it's very corporate, it's very consistent, or at least so she thinks. And so that shooting that on film and really desaturating it can help convey the world that she's living in, and then going into when she actually takes a trip with mushrooms. That shot on digital, which is much more saturated, vibrant, you know, again, sort of visually communicating that oftentimes when people do take these substances, they can find a sense of clarity, not just sort of emotionally, but audio visually as well.
You, Chris, and Benjamin, I love the dynamic between the three of you. I think it's fantastic. How important was it for that to work in order for the show to come off more authentic? Because for me watching it, I believed the journey that the three of you, obviously the two of them trying to convince you post losing your job and stuff like that. How important was that relationship between the three of you to be authentic for us to see?
It was super important because one thing that you referenced earlier is I think that's the heart of it. And I think that's the softer side of this main character who is, again, dealing with this identity crisis. Like, is she going to be a little bit more of the capitalistic side of her mom, or is she going to sort of lean into the loving, more communal side of her dad, who actually influenced her to go into science because he was a very renowned botanist and he just loved plants, and he believed in science. So I think it was super important because it's like the yin and the yang. And in those moments, she's allowing herself to breathe a little bit more and let go of holding on to what she has thought up until this moment as the perfect image of who she is as Madison Shepherds. So, and Luke, obviously his character is constantly like challenging her to either like dig in harder to what she believes in, but actually underneath is starting to question, because he's sort of everything counter to who she is.
It's funny to me because it's not a very long episode, but I feel like there's so much in the episode that really kind of entices you to want more. How important, I mean, obviously I understand, you know, it's important, but how much in the back of your head when you're writing this, and even, you know, as a producer, as starring, you have so many different roles, how important is it to nail that pilot?
Well, even like on a more micro level, like takes we didn't have when you shoot on film. This is to anyone who's considering shooting on film. You don't get that many takes because it's a limited amount of material that you have to record on. So I think in general, that idea of being really focused and having everybody bought in and being really focused was something that we tried to sort of set the tone with out of the gates. So yeah, we really wanted to show in this pilot, listen, there's a whole world here. There are character arcs and journeys that you will be able to see from this pilot, and a lot of different narrative pathways to go beyond one season. So it was really important for us to kind of dial it in and hopefully, resonate and translate what we had in our minds and our hearts.
Last question. Obviously, this last year has been very trying, and obviously, my first two-part question is: how have you kept the creative juices kind of flowing through this time? And do you have any advice for any aspiring screenwriters?
Oh gosh. This time has been incredibly trying for so many people. I would go as far as to say for everyone, but obviously it's hitting different people in different ways. For me, one thing that I actually benefited from is it allowed me to sort of hole up and just write because there's just not as much going on. There's so many times where I just sort of like have these fantasies of just being in a forest where like there's no phones, and all that's asked of me is to obsess and overanalyze on characters and story and journey and all of those things that I love, and jokes and comedy. So in that way, that's how I kept myself great. I just wrote and thought of different ideas, and some I chased down longer pathways than others. What I would say to aspiring screenwriters, I mean, you always hear like, write, if you want to be a writer, write. And I absolutely agree. I also think that a big part of writing that I don't know is always talked about is not on the page. It's thinking about it and thinking about it. And, obviously I have a writing partner, so we talk a lot, but you can talk to other people about it. You can, observing, spending a lot of time in that development process, I think is really valuable. And going to the page when you're ready. I think sometimes there's this compulsion of like, okay, it's not a real thing until I get it on the page, but you can go to the page a little prematurely, and then you find that it's kind of an anemic story. So I think that's one piece of advice that I would give. Obviously getting feedback is also another big one that people will tell you. Susan and I we actually got to workshop this script and the Blacklist and Women in Film episodic lab. And we got to hear from some super talented writers in our lab, whether they were showrunners that came in to work with us or they were our peers. Super, super valuable. And that's one other thing that I will say is find a group of peers and near to peers and mentors. If you can, find them and nurture those relationships, because you will want to continue to go back for guidance and feedback when you need that outsider objectivity that at some point in almost every project you will not be able to have.
Erica, thank you so much for your time today. I had a blast with the pilot. I can't wait to see more of it. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, Ricky. I really appreciate it, and all of your astute observations.